Hi, welcome to Conversation Starters with Jewish Museum Milwaukee. I am delighted to be joined today by Shahanna McKinney Baldon, who has a super long resume of so many community organizations, so much organizing, so much educating in our community around a number of different issues. But most recently, she has been working at the Wisconsin Center for Education Research at Madison, at UW Madison, and she is the special assistant for diversity and inclusion there. And she also has founded an organization, Edot Midwest Regional Jewish Diversity Collaborative, which we're going to be talking about today. So I'm really excited to be sharing this space with her and having what I see as a really important conversation that has so many different ways in which we can approach it. So I want to start by hearing about Edot and what you guys are doing.
Thank you, Ellie. I'm so glad to be here. And I only wish that I was really in Milwaukee at the museum, face to face with folks in the community, my beloved hometown. I've been in Madison for like 8 years.
And it still is not home?
I mean, it's home. Shout out to Madison. Naomi, I heard you posted something, even though you're moving away. Yes, Madison is home, but Milwaukee is my foundation. Milwaukee will always be my hometown. It's where I was born and raised. It's where my people are. It's where when I show up, people want to kiss me and love me up. And,
probably better that you're not here right now because that sounds dangerous.
Social distance, blow kisses. I started this organization last August. The name is Edot Midwest, the Midwest Regional Jewish Diversity Collaborative. The name of the organization is a nod to Edot HaMizrach and the objectification of the Oriental Jews. And my experience as a Midwestern Jew doing work nationally and feeling like, wow, it's almost as if I'm from this far, far, far off land. And Ellie, you and I were talking about that a little bit in terms of your experience in the museum world and how it's really important to be plugged into the national networks. But our regional diversity is an element of our diversity. So I've been being an advocate and an educator around racial and ethnic diversity in Jewish communities for decades. And I got to this point in my national work where I started to feel really urgent about the fact that I was from Wisconsin and all of this New York and Bay Area stuff was awesome, but that I really needed to get more attention on and more resources toward leveraging the momentum from the coasts and applying that momentum in service of our smaller communities in other regions. And so last year, a new initiative was created, the Jews of Color Field Building Initiative, which is a cooperative funding effort among several large foundations. And we were able to get our first grant from the Field Building Initiative to launch this Midwest effort. We started off with 3 focus communities, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, and Cleveland. And we just launched a new partnership with Detroit Jews for Justice to bring Detroit into our Edot family tree. And our theory of action is about investing in the leadership of Jewish people of color in Midwest communities, who then do work to create new ways for Jewish people of color and diverse Jewish families to engage in Jewish community life, and also build relationships between our local Jewish organizations and the larger national ecosystem of Jewish social justice organizations and Jewish organizations that are doing racial justice work. I guess I'll just say that So far, despite some foreseeable challenges like navigating bureaucracies and some unforeseeable challenges like a pandemic, we've had some wonderful, incredible successes over this past year. We built an amazing team. I want to give a shout out to Kai Mishlove, our Milwaukee point.
Watching online right now.
Hey, Kai. And Yoshi Silverstein is our Cleveland point. Lasha Tilson is our Minneapolis point, and Kendra Watkins has just joined the team. They are our Detroit point. And these folks are just amazing and have figured out all kinds of exciting ways to connect and build the network in person, and then when the pandemic hit, also virtually. The title of this talk is The Fierce Urgency of Now. And there's a subtitle too, I can't see it. Is it doubling down on our efforts to eliminate? What is it? Can you say it?
I didn't put it in here, but it is. It's doubling down on our, and I'm going to go to the museum page to get it.
Okay, great. But, so we're going to talk a little bit about that terminology, the fierce urgency of now, in a minute. But I want to know what we're doubling down on, because I'm trying to remember. I remember emailing it to you, and I want to make sure.
And I could have written it in my notes here.
It was a long title. It probably doesn't fit on anything.
It didn't show up there either. I think it's about doubling down on racial justice in light of the murder of George Floyd. I believe that's the full title.
Yeah. So we kind of have a dual track for the way that our organization engages in that work. One track is supporting Jewish community organizations in their coalition building work with communities of color. And
so that would be a more outward-facing approach?
And then we also have an inward-facing approach, which is about ending the effects of racism on Jewish community spaces. And, one of the challenges we come up against is I don't know anybody in the Milwaukee Jewish community who is a racist or who doesn't want African American Jews or Latinx Jews to have a home in their synagogue. But the challenge is that racism is about individual acts of hatred, but it's also about systems and implicit bias that affects interactions. And so we have this dual track, which is about the outward-facing coalition building work and supporting that work. And then we have this inward-facing work, which is about creating new ways for Jewish people of color to engage in Jewish community, and in many cases to kind of reclaim their Jewish identity and reclaim their spot in the Jewish community. I know several Black people in Milwaukee who describe themselves as used to be Jewish because they faced racism in Jewish community spaces, and it drove them to seek community elsewhere. And that's a very, very common phenomenon. If you read the survey of Jewish demographic studies that Jews of Color Field Building Initiative put out about a year ago, that's one of the things they talk about in that report is Jewish people of color kind of being driven away from Jewish community by the racism. And
what are the ways in an organized Jewish community, when we are making spaces welcoming, when we are what are the things we can observe and that we can do to be proactive to make our spaces open and welcoming?
Well, I will say that having a checklist of things, a few short things that you're going to do is not going to be effective.
Okay.
It's really important that your organization take on a plan for strategic work in this area that's going to be invested in and that's going to be sustained. It's been hard to get lots of calls in the past month after this horrible tragedy of George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis and the subsequent unrest. To get these invitations from folks, some of whom I know and some of whom I don't, saying, "Oh no, Shahanna, what should I do? You know, will you send me a checklist of things that we should be doing?" And I've had to have some tough conversations about, and there is not a short checklist that you can implement. And it's not okay to expect that people of color are now going to come and do your organizational development work for you, for free. And especially the folks who kind of weren't interested in partnering with us in a proactive way when we launched. It's just, we've had to have some tough conversations. But that's all to say that it's really important to take on an organizational strategy that you're investing in, that you have plans to sustain. You've got to be centering people of color and Jewish people of color as you're taking on that work. And you have to make sure that you're bringing in folks who have expertise in these areas to coach and advise and guide you along for pay as you're taking the work on. And I would just like to emphasize that I talked about the kind of dual track of the coalition building with our wider communities of color, and then also the internal work of making Jewish community life more welcoming for Jewish people of color and our families. And whichever track you're focusing on, you have to be centering Jews of color. Don't do coalition building work with communities of color without centering Jews of color. And don't do work to make your organization more welcoming to Jews of color and other people of color without centering Jews of color. And it, I've been doing this work for a long time, and it's been exciting to see that as things have been happening over the past month, there is a lot more attention to the fact that Jewish people of color exist and that we have a particular experience. But it's also been challenging because we're humans, and so we make mistakes along the way as we're learning to do new things. And so there's been some especially emotionally laborious pieces of what I've been getting into the past month or so. But it is also important to pause and notice that we are advancing, and that hard as it is, even 5 years ago, we didn't have the same types of infrastructure. We didn't have organizational backing. I wasn't coming to the museum as, the director of this organization. I was there as, Shahanna, who's volunteering, who's kind of doing it because it has to be done. So yeah, the work is definitely moving forward, and I'm very excited, and I'm very proud to be leading in this space around focusing on our Midwest communities.
Within your kind of broad Midwestern network, how are you what are the collaborations that you're looking for, and what does that collaboration look like to you?
Yeah. We have different types of partnerships with different types of organizations. I would love to give a special shout out to the Jewish Community Relations Council of Milwaukee, and hi to Ilana, and also hi to Jenny. We launched our partnership with the JCRC while Ilana was still at the helm there. And now Jenny's there, and we're really, really excited for her leadership. And what that partnership has looked like lately has been coaching and advising. It's been helping to identify some areas where things have happened in the past and there might be an opportunity to move things forward. It's been being a part of communicating among organizations. So Tikkun Ha'ir just put out a statement, and my former student, Sammy,
She's great.
she's
She might be in here. I don't know.
Her a refuah shlema on her shoulder. She's with her shoulder. So kind of being a part of kind of a communication loop there a little bit on the statements that folks are putting out, but also what are they planning to do once the statements are out, and what are the existing collaborative relationships in Milwaukee, and what is the emerging vision under new leadership for those relationships. Let's see, in Minneapolis, we work with a wonderful partner called Jewish Community Action, and our partnership there has some similarities, but also some differences. I went out there and did some programming several months ago, and also spoke at their annual meeting. We were a part of putting together a virtual Havdalah for Minneapolis that then ballooned, and folks from all over the country actually ended up tuning in. But we worked closely with them on making sure that Black Jews in Minneapolis were centered in the creation of this event and also in the participation of it. In Cleveland, we work with Mitsui Collective that's based in Cleveland, and that also has several Cleveland relationships. And in Detroit, our primary partner is going to be Detroit Jews for Justice. But then we also are developing other kinds of partnerships. We have a lot of synagogues that want to partner with us, so we're looking at developing a kind of scaled down model for what it might look like to partner with a particular synagogue, and as opposed to having an anchor organization for an entire community. And then we also partner a lot with other JOC-led organizations. JOC is an acronym that stands for Jews of Color.
I heard a rumor that you coined this term.
I was one of the early adopters of this term, which just means I've been around for a long time, doing this work for a long time. But yeah, I did publish an article about that very thing in Alma magazine, which is this young Jewish feminist publication. And because what I wrote about was having been a part of a special issue of Bridges Journal for Jewish Feminists and Our Friends in 2000 or 2001, we did an issue kind of by and for Jewish women of color. And it was very early on in this work, and there weren't a lot of folks that were using the term at that time. So I wrote about that issue and being an early adopter of the term. And it was cool to publish that piece in Alma, which is kind of like, a granddaughter of Bridges Journal in a lot of ways.
Your colleague Yoshi just put the link to the article in the comments. So people, you can check it out. It's right there in the comments. Thank you, Yoshi.
Thank you.
For being on the ball when I can't. I'm facilitating, and I'm like, ooh, that would be a good.
So we're sitting here at home clicking. Well, I know we're short on time. Can we pivot and talk a little bit about the fierce urgency of now?
Let's talk about the fierce. And actually, Virginia Spatz gave me the subheading there. It is doubling down on our Jewish commitment to racial justice. That's that I was missing. That was brilliantly phrased by you and got left off.
It's a good title, right? And part of what I want to just put out there is the fierce urgency of now cannot depend on, God forbid, another Black person getting killed by the police or some other horrible tragedy that kind of gets our attention. The fierce urgency of now needs to be about establishing a commitment to working proactively, to double down over and over again on our Jewish commitment to racial justice. It aligns so closely with our Jewish values, besides the fact that there are Jews who are targeted by racism, and I mean contemporary American racism against people of color. We have these really important Jewish values, B'Tselem Elokim, Tzedek Tzedek Tirdof.
In the image of God, justice, justice shall you pursue.
Al ta'amod al damrecha, do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. These are our Jewish values, and we must apply them to our contemporary American condition. This is what Jews have done over the millennia, is our values have sustained us. Our practices have sustained us because they've sustained us as individuals. And so those of us who wonder, well, I'm not racist, so what does this have to do with me? We all have a part to play. We all have a part to play. Okay, so I want to just say something about this quote, the fierce urgency of now, and then we're going to show a little clip of a video. So the quote is from Martin Luther King. It's from the 1963 March on Washington. And the quote is, "We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. This is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action." How can we take that on daily, not just in a reactive manner? So this quote has a very deep meaning for me. In January of 2019, I was a part of an action with other Jewish women of color. We attended the Women's March in Washington, D.C., and basically stood tall and proud together, saying, we are here and no one is going to tell us who we are. And you may not recall, but there was a machlokes, a dispute in around the 2019 Women's March. Someone said Farrakhan, and everybody got really concerned. And it turned into a kind of, well, these white Jews. And we stood up and kind of stepped right into that space and said, no. We had a dozen Jewish women of color from the Midwest region who attended that action. And we're going to show a little video from standing on stage at the end of the march, where my sister friend and colleague, Yavila McCoy, uses this quote from Dr. King, "The fierce urgency of now."
We are here as Jews and as Jewish women of color marching. Giving thanks to the Most High God, who is good and whose mercies endure forever. Shabbat Shalom. The prophet said, we are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. This is no time for apathy or complacency. This is the time for vigorous and positive action, the prophet said, Dr. King. As a new member of the Women's March Steering Committee, I am feeling both humbled and super proud to be standing here with you, with my sister April, with all of our sisters and Jewish women of color who have stepped up and stepped out in this moment to lift up a new Jewish reality. We are here for ourselves. We are here for our families. We are here for our communities. We are here for this country. And we are here for the world. At this time, on most Saturday afternoons, I would be at a table with my husband and my children enjoying our Sabbath meal.
Yep.
We would be taking comfort in our traditional observance of the Sabbath. Yet today, I am standing here with you in a wave at the edge of the sea, because there comes a time when there is a need for something in our tradition called Pikuach Nefesh. Giving power and others' lives comes tantamount to our comfort. We are here at the Women's March, standing with you. We are affirming on this day that human rights are women's rights, and that women's rights are human rights. We are standing on this platform, honoring the fact that the Women's March policy platform is fighting for changes in our government that will mitigate suffering for all of us. We are here to positively shape our future. We are standing with women who are involved in the criminal injustice system. We are standing with refugees.
So, Shahanna, aside, and we saw you up at the front there holding the Torah. You actually held the Torah for hours that day. How long were you holding the Torah?
Hours. I can only say I'm a graduate of Hillel Academy and Milwaukee Jewish Community High School, and I love the Torah. I read that Torah so hard that day. It was a really great day.
One of the things that this points to in looking at that fracas that came out around the Women's March is the challenge of intersectional activism, and that all of us come at activism with all of these different identities and pieces. How can we as communities get to a place where we see the broader good as opposed to the individual concern?
Yeah. It's a very important question for people in America's most segregated city to be asking themselves over and over again. There is a part for every single one of us to play, no matter your identity, no matter your priorities. For all justice-loving people, there is a part to play. And I think the challenge is more about identifying the values that you hold dear and holding them out for yourself and pointing back to them over and over and over again when the discouragement sets in. Because honestly, if it was up to any one of us on this call, racism, segregation, anti-Semitism, police violence against Black people would be over. We would have taken care of it. But changing systems is not a one-person job. Although one person can cause great damage, and we are experiencing that today in our country. There is a part for each of us to play, and we can work individually and make a difference, but at the same time, we are stronger together. So I think that that's the value that I'd like to point to your question about kind of moving past the individual concerns, is that we are stronger together. And we can, it's only groups of people that have brought change. Every time that we have experienced great change that's moved humanity forward, it's been because people have led us. Hashem also has played an important part. Mm-hmm. But even our Torah, there's never a story where Hashem just does something. There's always a person who is also leading. And so,
the power of partnership as well, which is something that I all look for.
That's right. The power of partnership, and we can be partnering as individuals, or we can be partnering as elites in our organizations. That's one of the things about kind of the mystical or magical memory of the Black Jewish Coalition from days of old is there's this idea that there were just all these individual people who were having brotherly and sisterly love and doing things together. And that was happening in some ways. It was certainly happening in the Communist Party. There were a lot of Black and Jewish relationships that were connected to folks' involvement in that organization or those organizations. But the Black Jewish Alliance was really about the leaders of organizations working together in a very strategic way. And so, yeah, we have to be investing in strong coalitions, and the work will be stronger and more successful the stronger and more successful the relationships are.
As kind of in this wrapping up space, there's so much activity right now, and we talked about the fierce urgency of now, but it's not being responsive and being kind of coming up with an ongoing plan. Is there a 6 months, 1 year, 2 years from, long-term vision that you're like, this is what, if we are doing the right things, this is where we're headed? And I'm not going to say don't be prescriptive if you don't want to, but if there are things that feel like this is where we start.
I think you should start by looking to the Black leaders in your local community and saying, how can I support your leadership? What is your platform? What are your demands? I think that would be the prescription that I would give. But I'll also say that there are other blueprints and platforms around. There's a letter circulating right now about Jewish community organizational investment in the inclusion of Jewish people of color that lays out some very specific demands and timelines for investing in the kind of work that I'm doing and getting aligned with local Black Lives Matter work. But I would say that in addition to looking to see what platforms are out there and how you can support them, to double down on leveraging the fierce urgency of now and pushing for in your sphere of influence, what are the organizations that you have some influence with, and making sure that they set some short and long-term goals for how are they going to center racial justice in their work, and how are they going to take, if it's a Jewish organization, that dual track of both coalition building with communities of color and also centering Jews of color and making the work that they're doing more welcoming to us.
Well, I've so appreciated the opportunity to talk with you. I don't know if you have anything else that you're like, this is what I wanted to say and I didn't get to it as we were talking today.
Yes, I want to say hi to my mom.
Yep, she's on here.
Okay,
I actually have to say, we have people from all over the country.
Oh, good.
In Brooklyn. I think there was somebody in California.
You can't wait to read through the chat. I will say, if you want to talk to me or get involved in what we're doing, please come to the Edot Midwest website, edotmidwest.org, and really looking forward to being in community with folks and taking on this call to leverage the fierce urgency of now in a way that's thinking proactively over and over again.
I threw the website contact info on our chat, so feel free to just jump through that way. And this has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you for starting this conversation, and I see this as the beginning, not the end. And I look forward to hearing what you guys think, and also to working further in the future with Edot on expanding the approach in these areas. So thank you. And Everyone, thanks for joining us for this edition of Conversation Starters.